Good evening, everybody. We are here for another boundary meeting. I want to say to the committee members, thank you again for your commitment, coming back, meeting after meeting on a voluntary basis. We appreciate all of the time and energy you have put into this, and I hope you understand, I recognize the hard work you have done in this work, again, on a voluntary basis. Tonight we will have more conversations. Rob will provide some more information and I think really give some details into why some things are the way they are. Also some additional information related to updated numbers. I know that was a question people have raised from time to time about, are we looking at current numbers? Are we looking at old numbers? So we'll talk about that. Also in comparison to other districts with regards to enrollment trends. I want to say one thing. I am breaking all rules by wearing one high school's mask tonight. I happened to be at Waubonsie speaking with some students, and I just kept the mask on, as opposed to my very neutral Indian Prairie mask. So please don't read into it, just know that I happened to be there earlier today. So again, for members of the community who are here tonight, we ask that during the night you stay seated, or for those of you who are seated, those of you who are standing, stay where you are in the process, and we'll continue through tonight as planned. So I also want to recognize board members who are here tonight. They are around in the room. Our board president is here, Laura Donahue. Our vice president, Mark, is rising, is somewhere. Thank you. You're all seated apart. Our secretary is Denny, Susan, and she's sitting by Sumner Jane. And up front, there's Allison Foster. And up front here, a Warrior graduate himself, Mr. Carubas, Justin. I hope I didn't miss any board members here tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob. Rob?
Good evening. I was told I cannot move, so anyone who's come to these meetings, you used to see me walk around, so I will be stationary here so we get all of the audio. As every meeting, we have different things that we have to cover, and we'll talk about those items, things like our guiding principles, our boundary criteria, but then I have some new information to share, because we've been hard at work looking at some different things. And then also some clarification to some of the things you as a committee member have been talking about, but most assuredly things that we're hearing from some of the feedback that's happening at the board level and through the district websites. So our goal tonight is to have a lot of interaction like we have been having with the committee members at your tables. And then we'll do a report out to see where you guys are at as we get in preparation for November 8th, November 9th, and November 10th. For those of you that are committee members, if you'll pick your phones up, and if you remember the number that you text into, if not, raise your hand. Dave Wilkerson, who's with me, one of our RSP consultants, he'll come to you. He'll give you the information that you need to put in so that you can answer the questions that we have through this process. All right, for the benefit of everyone, if you remember, we had a process that was kicked off with the Board of Education back in April of 2021. And this visual that you see, it's also on the district websites, was put together because we knew there were different components to this process that was required to get at the end a plan that's workable for what's happening with enrollments and what's happening with capacity, what's happening with programs in every one of your buildings. So it started with blue boxes, the Board of Education. It transitioned to you as committee members. And again, thank you for coming here this evening and each of the nights that we've had this. We are on meeting number 7. And so a lot of people have lost the context of how we've gotten here, and I'm going to try to right-set us here through a few slides here in a bit. But you as a group have been guiding us through how do we get to something that follows what the board established with our guiding principles and our boundary criteria. We have just finished our latest enrollment analysis, and that's why you see that arrow with the yellow box pointing in. We are entering into really one of the more important parts of the process, not to take away anything that you as committee members have provided, but to start getting the inputs in a way from the community on how this has evolved. And so hopefully they can start to see the storylines of why we're here today. Because nobody here, whether it's the board members, you as committee members, or even us as RSP, have created any of the situations that we're experiencing with enrollment. Well, maybe you guys, because you're just not having enough children to offset the loss of kids. So I can't take the blame for that one. Wrapped around the whole process is this ACE, and I think this is really, really important because we all know at the cornerstone of when it gets beyond, when I look at a map and how this impacts my family, my friends, the way I know things, we have to keep in mind the academic pillar, we have to understand the culture pillar, and economics are driving what we maybe can do or what we can't do. So that's always wrapped around this, regardless of how we're looking at any of these particular items in a concept. We have these guiding principles, and again, depending on the lens that you look through, these guiding principles may take on a different life form, and that's perfectly legit. We've tried to pull that out of all of you in each of these committee meetings. We'll hear more of that with the public when we get to those public inputs. The board did establish the top 3 criteria, the metrics by which we would determine, are we meeting something in this concept as it relates to, let's say, some data that we can put together to understand, is it enhancing or making the situation better as we look at this from a district perspective. So we had demographic considerations. That's why you have all these different tables that look at it from different perspectives. If you want to look at it from ethnicity, if you want to look at it from some of the programs with special education or free and reduced lunch, or if you want to look at it with the housing type that ties back to the zoning that the city of Naperville and Aurora and Bolingbrook have. So is it single family attached, single family detached, apartments? And then we had neighborhoods intact, so trying to keep neighborhoods intact. And sometimes you get lost with what a neighborhood is between the major arterial roads with the spaghetti network of our roads, but there are differences in what we see in some of these neighborhoods as we tie them back, but trying to keep the neighborhoods intact. And then the board also felt, really we had 2 other criteria that were tied for 3rd, physical consideration capital, so really not trying to spend any additional dollars. Now we know this kind of goes in a little bit of conflict with some of the things we've talked about with innovation spaces, right? But we pivoted to conversation of innovation spaces because of the conversation that we have too much capacity in part of our district, and is there a different way of looking at the solution than just closing or repurposing a building? And of course we have to be mindful of the projected enrollment and building utilization. So that's the things, again, you as a committee, those are the focus that we had. We have all these ground rules. You as committee members, you've been outstanding in following what we're trying to do there. Consensus. Remember, we've been talking about this the last couple meetings. We know it's not popular with our plans. If you go back to our last meeting, we were 52%, 48%, right? We're kind of in the middle, like, hey, is there something that's maybe a little bit different? So again, when we get to the point of a recommendation to the board, we absolutely want to follow what consensus is. One thing that I, as administration and RSP and conversations that we've had here with the committee, we found that there was a discrepancy in where some of the boundaries were between, I believe, Fry and Peterson was the greatest change. So whether it came from the student data system, the transportation system. So you're going to see all of the maps that we're showing you tonight. Now we've rectified what those differences are based on what is being implemented in your district. So you're going to see that with all of your existing boundaries, whether it's elementary, middle school, and high school. This is a new slide. So before I came here, I heard a news report that Chicago Public Schools was down like 10,000 students or something, right? A lot of kids. And they made a comment, they said they've gone to the suburbs. I'm here to tell you, with your data here, they didn't come to Naperville. Not in a way that we actually saw more kids. Now, there probably are kids and families that were in Chicago Public Schools that are here in your district, but not in such a way that we saw an increase. We've continued to decrease. And I'll share a little bit more about that as we get to some other slides, but really the story is this. We're graduating more kids like this year, and the next year we have fewer kindergartners. We're seeing a population as a state and as a metro, there's fewer people. We're seeing live birth data where there's fewer live births. It was unsustainable to continue the Chicago Cubs World Series victory number of live births. We're going to be updating this live birth data, but we know there's fewer people. And so how does that start to impact what we see for enrollment? And we did that for each of the counties. Where kids are, you just go out to the website, you can see so many different things. Development activity. This has been so incredibly fluid as we've been working with the districts, the city of Naperville, the city of Aurora, the city of Bolingbrook, what's happening and how fast developments are occurring. So this has been updated to take into account some of the latest things that we think are going to happen with the Fox Valley Mall areas of most concern, because we've seen some different changes there. I'll speak even more to this slide in a few other slides down the road. But you can see right now we're at, with K-12 enrollments, we're at 25,565, and that was the official count data for K-12 students. And you can see we're forecasting you to go towards 24,000 students. This is a little bit more of a decline than what we were forecasting last year. We'll come back to this. Again, recap, all the things you guys have provided us continue to evolve to this next iteration of our conversations. So again, go there and you can see everything. We're trying to be transparent with how all that stuff evolves. This is more meeting 6. And let me talk here. So here's the good news. So for me as a data guru, yeah, I'm so happy with what we projected on accuracy. Not happy that you're declining in enrollment. But when you look at what we've been able to do for your district, this should give us some good comfort on when we're looking at our scenarios, do we really have an accuracy tab on what's really happening? And there's been some very peculiar things ranging for changes in who owns apartment complexes and how we've seen the impact that has had in enrollments. Just lots of amazing things, but basically you could say from a statistical perspective, almost perfect being 99.99% accurate. Development. So some of the things that have been changing is as the developers are working with the cities, the plans evolve based on how they're seeing their ability to sell their product, right? Their end goal is to sell products. So that's one thing. So these new developments. Re-greening. I can tell you, we keep wishing when we look at a lot of these older subdivisions, and we've been hearing things from people saying, hey, we have maybe 10% turnover in or the sale of properties. And so we're going to have all these new kids that are coming in. The best way that I can give you an example, a baseball analogy, if you're batting 100 and you've had 1,000 at-bats, think about the at-bats being the number of units in your subdivision. The ability to increase your batting average from 100 to 300, you have to get a hit a lot of times consecutively to raise it from 100 to 300. When we talk about re-greening, we have to have something more significant than 3% or 5% turnover in the housing inventory. Just that on the surface. You start to layer in things with population decline, having fewer children per households, having fewer live births. You can see the regreening it just is not going to happen at a level in these subdivisions, generally speaking, apartments, whatever that type of development, that's going to take them back to their heyday. We have data that we're looking at from the school district that I think goes back 15 years. We have subdivisions that we're getting 50 to 60 kindergartners every year, and this year they're getting like 8 or 9. So there's just a huge change, and yes, we're trying to forecast in our model there's going to be some regraining, but the regraining is not going to get them back to 50, 60 kindergartners each and every year. I also want to touch on proximity to buildings, because again, this has been a conversation that you as a group, individually, we've talked about, and so we just kind of put a map together to give some context. Again, depending on the lens that you look from, how does this relate to where buildings are and where you live? And so we just drew, we have Wabansie, we have Nequa, and then we put Welch and Fry, because they're the ones that are closest to Nequa. And so if you're west of 59, you can see you're 6 minutes to Nequa, right? But you're basically going 11 minutes. We just did a drive time from each of the elementary schools. Obviously, the closer, farther north you go, the less drive time you likely have to get to Wabansie. Further south, the shorter your time is to get to Nequa. So we just wanted to give you some of that perspective of how, when we're looking at our concepts, some things may be a little bit different if we weigh things geographically in that type of perspective. And not trying to weigh one way or the other, just trying to give you some visuals as you look at these maps to understand why would we change something that's already going to Wabansie or something that's already going to Nequa. All right, I want to take a little bit of time on capacity. Okay, capacity has been an evolving metric. If you remember, we started out with capacity, and then the numbers changed a little bit as the district worked through what that capacity would be in relation to the programs that are in each and every one of these buildings. And so when we talk about elementary capacity, there's conversation like, hey, are you taking into account the preschool that's there, or the special education, or some other special programming? The capacity that we're listing for each of these buildings is the core K-5 classroom capacity. So just think about that as a homeroom. So if it's a 4-section, meaning 4 classes of kindergarten, they're used all for kindergarten, first grade, second grade. What happens, this is important with space. When we get space in buildings, it may no longer be used as core space. For instance, we have several buildings that are less than 40% utilized, but if you walked in there at some given point in those spaces, we're probably using that space. It's just differently than how it would have been designed for. But the capacity that we're showing you is core K-5. So that's saying, hey, we know there's some preschool there, and those preschool programs are still going to be there. It says if there's some special education or ELL space that's taking other core classrooms, that's still there. We're not changing any of that. One thing, if we repurpose or close buildings, and I'm going to come back to that topic here in a moment, but when we do that, we have to make sure we have space for all of those other programs. You can't just say, hey, we're going to do something different with this building and not take that into account. When we get to the high school, one of the things that we thought was important in the conversation, the end goal is to have equitable high school enrollments. And we've talked about things as it relates to the size of those buildings. And because we have the freshman center, Nequa has the ability to have more kids, but the kids aren't housed under one roof. So we want you to think about that. So with capacity, so here we have this capacity, how it relates to our programs. Then as we started to, I think, pivot, because the fear of we have so much available capacity or declining in enrollments, the natural tendency is, hey, do we repurpose closed buildings? Conversations that we were having with you as a committee was, hey, is there another way to look at capacity? And so this is where district administration started to talk about these innovation spaces. That's why 3 meetings ago we had, although I don't think it did it as much justice as if you saw those spaces, you saw up on the screen what that might mean for innovation spaces. So that gave us a second capacity as we evaluated if the option was going to pivot towards something like that. The downfall of this, we don't know the true costs of what it might take to get into those. And you've heard me probably say this in other meetings. But we're trying to pivot saying, hey, if we like these neighborhood schools and we like the systems that we have, is there another way to look at it? So that's how the innovation space came about. And so depending on the concept, that's going to determine what capacity is used. And so I think in the information that we're giving you today, we're also, I think, put a third column of capacity, what's happening in that particular building. So we have like a current capacity, we have this new capacity, and just giving you some visuals of what this all means. This slide is very similar to what you had at our last meeting. You're just trying to spell out some of the details. And I even admitted to you at the last meeting that ideally we would have our strategic plan in place. We'd have a facility master plan in place that we could like really dig into some of these components of what the brick and mortar means. What do we want to do instructionally in these buildings? That's going to morph into something that's, I think you're going to find very exciting as that process gets kicked off. But we want to set the groundwork of, hey, we're looking at spaces a little bit differently. All right, so the last thing that I have is the whole idea of repurposing or closing spaces. This is really kind of 2 categories. I mean, I didn't list it up here on the bullet points. Actually I did. We have like Indian Plains and Wheatlands, right, where we're housing some alternative programs and maybe we can move them to other buildings. That's a little bit easier to say we're repurposing or closing that space. So as we started to look at the south side and what we were hearing from you as committee members, we have so much space, we have so many buildings that operationally would be 35, 40%, 50% capacity. What do we do with all that available capacity? And so that's where the conversation of, well, if we have this, it's going to be different with what we have for class sizes, staffing. That became the conversation of, hey, what if we took buildings, repurposed, or took offline? So how did we get to saying any particular building is offline? It's really just a work through to say we're going to have less capacity. Is it Clo? Is it Bilta? Is it Graham? Is it one of the others? That's something that this group isn't going to decide, right? This is going to be something that's a little bit bigger. We were tasked with looking at boundaries and starting to create a plan that if we're tracking, and data is suggesting we're tracking, we have fewer kids. Here's some limelight to this. We do think that the elementary enrollment's going to stabilize. But it's going to stabilize where if we use our buildings the way we currently are using them, we don't need as many elementary buildings. It's not popular to say, but that's the reality when you have a declining enrollments. So hopefully that helps build in that it's not necessarily targeting any one particular school. It was really just in theory and concept that we could take something off, and when you look at the clustering of buildings, okay, you could take this one, we could easily say one of the others. So hopefully that helps give a little bit of understanding there. The last bullet points, and then we're going to get into the thing where you don't have to listen to me talk. I think the underutilization, everyone, whether it's you as committee members, I think I can speak on behalf of you in this particular thing. Even administration, even my team, we would prefer not to be even having a conversation about closing buildings, repurposing buildings. We would prefer the enrollment wasn't declining. But those are the realities that we're faced with. So we either start the conversation now as you as a group, or we just put our heads in the sands and we just wait for it to get to the point where you have the district administration saying, we can't afford this, or we have to do something immediately different. And so this really starts that conversation. It's not meant to be offensive, not to meant to be a disruptor. This is just the reality of conversations that we have to talk about. And you as a group have the ability to walk us through how do we get there. I can honestly say, and the board members, they don't have to give any signal to this, I don't think that when we have whatever this plan is, because we're trying to make it go into effect for next school year, you can't just repurpose a building like here we are in almost November of 2021. The ability to repurpose a building that's being used for core programs takes a little bit longer than that. So I don't think anything with a plan for 22-23 is going to say something's going offline. It's really the conversation of if we're headed in this direction, what are the things we have to think about in how we use those buildings? Do they stay in our inventory? Do we do things differently? All right, so this here is just to right set you as we go into the group setting at your tables. So I'll let you just kind of look at some of this stuff, and I'll explain what we pivoted to tonight. So as we heard feedback from all of you last time, and the challenges of really this space to put a large map up and to safely and comfortably get around those maps, we felt you were at a point where we could have less detail on the maps, and you can be sitting at your tables, and we could have maybe a different type of conversation because it's right there at your table instead of pushing things aside, setting all the maps down. So at your table, we gave you the 3 current boundaries for elementary, middle school, and high school. And then you're going to see concept 1 and concept 3. So I want to take a moment, like, we've heard some things. How did you skip from 1 to 3? Or what happened with 2 back in, let's say, August? So remember, we said this is a journey, and as we've been, as a group, moving through, there's certain things as you've looked at what these concepts have evolved to, they've changed meeting to meeting. There's only one small change tonight, and I'll get into that here in a moment. But they've evolved, and they've evolved based on what your feedback has been and how we're reacting to newer information. So when it was capacities, innovation spaces, what we're seeing with how you all look at things with the connectivity of neighborhoods. We know that we're adding places that are currently not assigned. So if we look at that Fox Valley Mall, right now, I think we have about 240 elementary students that potentially will be there in the next 5 years, so we need to assign them. Right now, it's not any assigned area. That's one of our elements. We also have heard about islands to try to reduce the number of islands because that creates a lot of our transportation challenges. It disrupts the neighborhood feel for those areas where the islands are occurring. So we have some bigger themes that we're trying to get at and what this particular plan could look like. Concept 1 is, again, the same as what we showed before, and concept 3. So we kept the same. We wanted to see how was the impact of the enrollment change impacting the district. And as we get into our conversation, I'm going to see what you guys are seeing and pull out. Do you see some things that have changed with what's happening with enrollment? So you're going to see what that is. The only area that we changed in concept 1 was the new area at Chelsea Manor and Chicory Place, because we saw that there was actually a little bit more enrollments potential at White Eagle than what we were seeing before this latest projection. And we already were really close to that 95% before, so we said we have to pull a little bit more out of White Eagle to get to our 95% perspective. Again, you guys have seen this. This is, again, trying to look at this from a neutral perspective, we're able to hit the guiding principles. We're able to mostly hit the themes with the boundary criteria. And again, this is just us looking at this. You can have a different opinion. That's the whole point of you meeting at your tables. I'll let you I'm going to get a drink. You guys read over this. All right, this should help you understand what we initially were seeing with benefits, drawbacks. And again, depending on your lens, you may say a drawback is a positive and you may say a benefit is a drawback. This is just us trying to look at the criteria, the guiding principles. How does this best meet that? Again, concept 3, the same as what we provided you last time. There actually was no changes here. We'll see what you guys think about how that looks. Again, we hit the guiding principles. We hit mostly all of the boundary criteria. There's probably still some more work to do. But again, if we look at these benefits and some of these drawbacks, it's kind of a mixed bag. There's more drawbacks of what you guys have responded to on this concept than what we saw with concept 1. One of the challenges we've had, and I think you'll be able to discern that tonight, is could we do the innovation spaces in either of the concepts? And the answer to that is probably yes. But what that looks like in each of those buildings might be a little bit different than the initial administration evaluation of those spaces. It might mean where we were programming in that there could be, let's say, 2 classrooms that could be an innovation space. Maybe it's only 1. And maybe as we look at the north, we can't do as much as we can in the south because we have more space. So yes, it depends. And it really gets into what is the willingness, what is the backing the board has towards creating those type of spaces, those type of experiences for students, either in a quick order or something that's phased in, knowing that as you have space might be the determinant on what that space really could look like. All right, so you're going to have all these tables in the other 11 by 17. I think there's 11 by 17 page where for each the elementary, middle school, and high school concepts, I think you should have those tables. So I'm looking there, yep, it looks like you have those. So what I'm now going to ask you to do at your tables, just start with concept 1. And what I really want you to focus on, this is the goal. What we take to the public. I want you to be looking at each of these concepts. Write down specifics. What is the good thing? What is the bad thing? How do we tell the story of why this concept is moving in that particular direction? You may not support concept 1. You may like concept 3. When you get to concept 3, you may actually like concept 1, or you may be like some people. Can we combine some of these things? Let's talk about that at the tables and put that in, because I think that is the valuable information when we get to November 8th, November 9th, and November 10th. What are we thinking as a group? Because I don't think anything may have changed from our last meeting. We're probably still split if we were to have to choose between either of these concepts. I'm going to let you get to work. I'll put some different things out every once in a while with the benefits, drawbacks. Maybe come up here and put the guiding principles. And we want to focus on those things. That's what the board has asked us to do. So I'm going to let you guys go to work. right, I imagine most of you have already moved into concept 3 if you are on concept 1. Continue your thoughts on each of those. I'm going to give you about 5 more minutes. And then I want to go around to each table and just kind of give some of the things. Again, what is this to look like when we go out on November 8th, 9th, and 10th? 5 more minutes. All right. My friend and colleague Dave is going to bring a microphone around to the table, and I want you, as a group, what are your thoughts of what your discussion was like this evening? And what does it mean as it relates to concept 1 or concept 3? Take it away, so start at table 3. Right there. Someone gets that in mind.
That's fine. So we're saying something good just about the entire concept 1, like any level, or we're just doing a lot of trades?
Yeah, just your general thought of the themes you spoke about at the table that are important to whatever we take forward at the public inputs.
We try to look at the whole picture of the child and of what changes they would go through. So when it comes to the plan we're in now, there were a lot of little hirings. And there were a lot of kind of disjointed areas and disjointed plans and where they went. It looked like an old school phone operating system going everywhere. So in the general concept that we saw were less islands, less driving, more opportunities for social togetherness with where they get to go. It seemed to make more sense when it comes to the splits and seeing repurposing as positive and the possibilities. And then also the feeder plan. The feeder plan seems to be better, the high school feeder plan at least. But those are some of the things we talked about of the plan's concept.
With concept 1, if I compare the map, it's kind of, we are turning everything upside down. Almost every community is affected with this proposal. The feeders might look really beautiful, but when we reorganize feeders, you're actually splitting communities and subdivisions. And then safety is another very big concern because we are, if you look at concept number 1, we're actually sending students across 59, which is a 4-lane highway. Yes. And also some of them through Ogden. Based on my research, Ogden is one of the most dangerous or top 10 dangerous intersections in Illinois. So if we have other options, we should not send our kids, and expose them to more risk. Right? That's one thing I noticed. Because at the end of the day, safety is not the
If we can please refrain from fighting so the committee can work.
So the other thing, and Rob, I asked you, is concept 1. I do not understand the boundary here between 87th, Welsh, and Mission Oaks. Stillwater, Mission Oaks. So I feel like the community is split. But I would like to understand is where is the boundary? Like, I have difficulties to understand based on this map where exactly we are split as a community.
Right, and I told you we'll touch on that when we come back.
Right, the problem is I will have difficulties to vote because this map is actually misleading me. I don't know exactly what I'm voting. So that's maybe something we should look into before.
And we'll cover that. We'll go to the next table with comments, please.
So, looking at the elementary schools, we generally like the improved continuity that Mayor Watt had and sort of unifying the Longwood area. We are concerned about city gate construction in some of the areas up north because the possibility that they're going to provide far more students than were originally built. Since they're so close to 59, it may make more sense to have them bus somewhere. space. From concept 3, the unifying of the Butterfield Road neighborhood seemed to make more sense for us over the current. So that's kind of how it is for your concept, also for concept 3. We also thought about the possibility of using proceeds from Wheatland to add on to Longwood or Brooks, Brookdale or Brooks. And it didn't quite make sense to close Plow because of its central location in the school district. Or, Graham for that matter, because it's close to 59. As far as middle schools go, we like the fact that there are no broken feeders. However, as a table, we were generally ambivalent. If we have to have a broken feeder, we didn't care whether it was a broken feeder in grade school and middle school, or middle school and high school. Overall, it seemed like there were reduced islands that were good. As far as enrollment goes, we like concept 3 better. And then for high school, we didn't think it made sense to send all the rest over to Equitable. And then we also need to, I think the board needs to take more focus on, all of the diversity that's being affected. I think we're looking more at streamlining and less at, and not focusing quite as much on the splits for single family versus multi-family. And then the one other point was, the last one was, some of these areas that are currently zoned but have commercial areas, we really should think about sending them to places where there is capacity. And some of the areas that are in white right now that aren't zoned but have commercial things, in the next 10 years we're going to have a lot of development like Fox Valley, and we should anticipate that ahead of time. Thanks.
So the discussion at our table is a little bit more high level instead of comparing and contrasting specific elements of like this is concept 1, but this is concept 3. We recognize that with closed 2 schools, we get a much better outcome with the feeders. If the school is open, the feeding process gets worse. So one of the things we believe that we're discussing, the group needs to consider, which is the lesser of 2 evils. Do we have more continuity within the feeder system? Or do we keep schools open? And we're split on how to best handle that, but to me, this is a very binary issue that we're now facing with these 2 concepts.
So for concept 1, we looked at the benefits and drawbacks from concept 1 and concept 3. The benefits of the one we thought were that it looks like the neighborhoods are being kept intact. There's much fewer islands, it looks cleaner, and much less broken feeders. Some of the drawbacks is that we don't believe that we're adding any enrichment or innovation in schools. And then we also had some questions about the island, the Maywatts Island, or C-59. It didn't make sense of just being out there. And I will.
For concept 3, we believe that, overall it is preparing the district and after in the future. But then not knowing what the innovation means and what we're getting from the innovation, we weren't sure how we could weigh the positives of that innovation and the space. It's over, what we were giving up in terms of having more lessons and, having the broken feeder system, which just happened to go across the elementary school at the middle school. And then we also noticed that there was one or a couple elementary schools that were running at 40% capacity in concept 3, and we didn't know if it was fiscally responsible to do that. We are actually talking about closing schools in another concept. And then I think, I guess,
Our table, we talked a little bit about pros and cons of both the two, mostly at the elementary level, I suppose. And concept one, a lot of people mentioned they did like the complete feeder system, so that was good. And I do feel like both of them, some of the items that are on the original map, maybe there could be a little more work done with that yet. I do feel like at the table there was some want that there was still some sort of refinement to the plan, and that maybe something else we could do to make these even more agreeable to more people. To concept three, we talked about, I guess I would just say with 2 schools going offline, I didn't think that was a fantastic option. And I guess I would just ask maybe the local neighborhoods around the elementaries elsewhere in the district to think about what would be like if in your neighborhood that went up. And also, I mentioned this before, but as a 20-year educator, hearing the word repurpose for a building makes me shudder. Nothing is going to reopen in those buildings that is as good as what is there now. So be aware of that also. And just financially here too, I just pulled some quick numbers out from Google for the school district. And we're talking about, just a quick glance here, that'd be about, it's me talking, not representing anybody else here obviously, but it'd be about $40 probably of the tax increase to keep both of those schools open. So I guess I'd just ask, that was your neighborhood school that's holding your neighborhood together, would you want that to be the difference breaker for you? And then also we like the innovation stations as well in those buildings.
Just to add to this concept for you, and I think in general our group has struggled a little bit because a lot of the concerns that we've had in the last several meetings they're kind of still there. And with concept 3, there's still all these broken feeders, and the question of how well we like not having to close schools, is it realistic to be able to pay and fund the solutions to some of those issues. So thinking about the north side, we agree that both concepts do help our schools on the north. But in general, it's very hard to get behind one concept or the other with much gusto, and we feel like that there are some big outstanding issues there.
Okay, so we talked about, I think our main concerns were the middle schools, with in concept 1, the middle schools were better because there were no broken feeders in concept 1, I'm sorry. And then in concept 3 though, I believe we were leaning more toward the high school, of liking concept 3 in the high schools. Particularly with the social, economic, and the diversity down off of 248 and 111 being most consistent with the current concept. And then elementary, there was a lot of broken feeders. But I think if there were going to be broken feeders, it would be one of the more in elementary, not necessarily at the middle school level. And so it's a little bit of both. We like this in this concept, we like this in that concept. So I don't know if they could mush all that together, make it all make sense.
We were also noticing as far as looking at more than just the streets, but looking at the diversity and economic stuff that concept 3 puts 3 elementary schools at almost 50% apartments and less single family, and I think that could be a huge change for those schools. So in concept 3 there was less equity across housing.
In between the two concepts, concept 1, we are liking the cleaner feeder system. One of the things too is looking at the long run and the fact that the district is going to continue to contract. I'm like, I would say neither one of, we're not really in love with either concept, but we don't want to turn into CPS and have school buildings that are down at 20-25% capacity in 5 or 10 years and still fighting to shut down schools that should have been repurposed years before. There's still some other issues though. We're kind of repeating a lot of what's been said, and that there's things we like in concept one and things in concept three. Concept one does seem to have a little bit better consolidation with the feeders and keeping areas closer together. One of the things that we actually discussed though was with like going around the Prairie cloud area, are we looking, if we're going to repurpose an entire building, are we looking at the right ones to repurpose? And maybe maintaining a school that's more central and looking at something that's more of an outlier as the district would contract in population was one of the things that we were talking about. I don't know.
One of the things that we initially talked about was we were all a little surprised that there were no teachers whatsoever at concept three. We expected to be some sort of evolution to look at it. So it threw us off a little bit. We wanted to talk a little about the concerns and the need for special education rooms in concept three, the importance of having space for special education students, but also not making those spaces almost exclusatory where they're segregated from the rest of the students, and the importance of that inclusivity. Let's see. Oh, yeah, and also.
Yeah, touching on the special education, we feel that the numbers for special education aren't really represented in either of the models. If we're going to be making certain decisions on reducing capacity through special ed rooms or STEM rooms, we need to know some of those special ed numbers, right? Are they, if they're in the population here on these sheets, we need to be able to see which schools have allocated space for those students, so we can better make a decision. If they've already utilized that space or not. The other point we raised was on feeders. Obviously intact feeders are important in certain areas than others, but we haven't really shown on these diagrams what percentage of students are affected by those broken feeders. It's not an on or off switch. It might only be 10% of the students that are affected by broken feeders. So if we knew percentages, it might change some of the decisions whether we want to feeder intact or not.
One other thing that we were talking about that we actually had the question that we would have coming in today is between the concepts, what is the fiscal impact? And that was one of the main things, because it's great to be going over all the information, but it cannot be necessarily gone through in complete vacuum this far into the process. So.
So we were concerned about the economic impact of the changes that in many different versions, poorer schools, as you can see by the number of kids who are on free and reduced lunch, got dramatically poorer in terms of their populations, with more than 100 kids in that category shifting to a school. And that has a dramatic impact on equity as it rolls out, as especially in the high school setting, if you compare middle school, you compare schools to each other. When schools have a lot more kids on free and reduced lunch, those kids have a lot less opportunities, and that worries us from an equity perspective. We're not excited about closing a neighborhood school, period. We don't think there's a large cost savings for it, and we think we're a community of neighborhoods, and for $400,000, it doesn't seem worth it to a neighborhood. And if we were going to close, we'd rather that you close one and not two. We appreciate that you got rid of islands. We think that it's nice when there are feeders, but it's not as important as lowering the populations of schools or balancing the socioeconomic impacts. And while we appreciate kids following other kids
when it comes down to it, it wasn't that important to anyone at our table. We're concerned that in these plans, we still have projected overcrowding at some schools, and we'd like to see a plan where we know from the start that we don't expect there to be overcrowding. And lastly, we're not sure why we're prioritizing these innovation centers. We'd like to see the district have a strategic plan that looks at all the possible things we could spend money on and do with spaces. And we have no idea why we picked this thing out of the air, innovation centers. It was a little bit of like, who cares? So.
All right, so if you can bear with me, if we go a little bit long, I want to kind of at least address some of the things, and you may not like the answer, you may think it's incomplete, but I want to at least try to go through some of the themes. So we'll start with the 87th Street county line. What does that mean and how is that confusing? So we have a county line that breaks right through there, and 87th Street jets down south and then comes back up, right? One of the things that we could look at is if there is a break, does it follow that jut of 87th Street and not follow the county line road that goes through that situation? So I want to at least talk that through. One thing that was mentioned as well was, hey, can we just move new developments to a building that has space? That's what we've been doing. That's why we have all the islands, right? So I want you to think about that, is that this is why one of the conundrums that we have is islands and trying to create this neighborhood feel that doesn't work years after those things happen. I have to come back to the Maywatts Island. I didn't know a particular thing other than maybe we needed more kids at Maywatts. So an ideal utilization, I heard that. So we have some buildings where we're right at 100% utilization on a concept, or we're down at 30%. In order to get a building that's underutilized, where we have a better utilization, we have to get more kids. And so then that starts to get at our challenges as you start this domino of movements. We then start having more neighborhood issues with transportation, more crossing over of some of the busy streets, which are all the challenges that we're already talking about with some of the areas that we are talking about moving. The choice of school closing. Gosh, I already started this. None of us want to close any of these schools. But it's almost, I want you to think about this. If we're using these spaces, and this is how we're going to use these spaces, if you know you have some sort of disease, let's say you have gangrene in your hands, do you keep the gangrene there? And I'm trying to get you guys to think about the perspective of, if the district knows we're going to have this number of kids, unpopular to say, do we have to have a plan in place for what the ideal number of buildings are? We need more information, because the choices of which school closes, I would tell you, gets into things such as, what is the deferred maintenance? What is the proximity to schools? There's so many variables that we're not able to get into on this. This is why it's like, in theory, if we're going down in enrollments, what are our options? The easiest one that everyone talks about is repurposing, closing, right? But accolades to you as a committee and the district as they're trying to respond. And the comment that was made back there, innovation spaces, that was just the initial start. When you're going through your strategic plan, there's going to be things with the mental well-being, social well-being of kids that you may want to integrate. Or I think I heard at one of the tables, maybe there's professional development spaces in these buildings for the staff to be able to go to, right? These are some things that, as we start to focus on this post-COVID and what we've learned and how we can have these spaces, it may be we need every one of these elementary buildings as we look at how these spaces can be redesigned. So I want you to think that anyone on our team is saying close buildings. The impact of special education. I spent a little bit of time with different people at that table. The numbers are in what we have for buildings, but here's where specifically with special education, becomes a challenge. You may have one student that may need certain space that may be an entire classroom or 2 classrooms. That program may not actually be where they reside, and so they have to go to that building. So what I've kind of said to other people at tables, we've done this enough to know that when you have students with these special program needs or special space needs, they usually are in an IEP, so an individual education plan, and so there's more than just we change the boundary and how it impacts those students. It's going to be something related to that IEP and where the program is, so that's another category. But the way it ties into this space is the way we're using special education, that's accounted for in those buildings. And so if we know the programs are going to be growing because of that need, we again need to plan for where will those spaces be. So kind of starting to step into some things that are facility master planning, but also things with education decisions. Again, it's all part of these boundaries because we're trying to figure out if we make any sort of change, how does this in the long term have a greater impact? I think those were all the general themes that I had. Let me go to some of the questions. So go ahead and get your phones out. I think I only have 4 questions. And then I want to touch on what the next steps are. All right, and as I have this up there, you can start to answer, but I want to kind of give you some background. So some observations are very keen. Hey, was there changes? Was there adaptation for what we're thinking about in any one of these particular concepts? And the answer is, what we found is as we've moved in these 2 directions where we're trying to focus on any one of these various variables, what's happening is, in order to change some of the things that you may be suggesting, it starts to violate what we're trying to accomplish with those particular themes in concept 1 or concept 3. So the benefit of taking this body of work where we more fully enveloped conversation about concept 1 and concept 3, if you notice, in many places, those areas are going to different places if they're being changed. If we look at Gombert, there's things where it goes to Gombert, others where it goes to White Eagle, or it goes to Owen. So we have a conversation where the community knows there's different ways that we could look at this. And if your focus is we want more complete feeders, you're maybe going to lean one direction versus the other. If you're saying, hey, I want more of this to look the way it is now, but make some of the changes, let's say on the north side, where we have these islands and we have this overutilization, hey, this is maybe the way we go. So what I'm telling you is, you may not like either of these because there's strengths. I think I heard, and weaknesses of each. I think I heard from one table where they said, could we just have, I think I'm going to be right, elementary concept 1, but have middle school concept 3 and high school concept 3? Hey, well, let's look. We probably could do that. But what type of impact does it have as we look at the feeders from elementary to middle school? So we can flush through that. But what I'm trying to suggest to you is, we know we don't have anything that's complete because we are trying to answer questions that there's not a happy answer. It's kind of like if you bought a house and you have this vision of remodeling it, and then you get in and you find out, oh, I can't move this wall because it's now going to cost me $50,000 more or something of that nature. This is the conundrum with boundaries. As we look at each of these layers, it kind of shifts us one way or the other. So I'm saying, however they set this poll up, I have 24 results. I know there's more than 24 of you. So was everyone able to get in? So 6 after I do the countdown, will show me what it is, at least I hope it does. So I'm gonna give you a few seconds. Countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And this one set up differently. Let's see if I can get hold of my assistant so I can know how to find this. Next question. The public will provide feedback that may enhance or pivot from the current and proposed concepts. We put this question in specifically because we know that you all are split basically 50-50 on if I was to force you, like when you go in on election day, force you to, you have to choose someone, right? And it may not be anyone that you want to choose. But we think, just like you've provided inputs and made some changes to how we're thinking about this, there's probably a good likelihood that the people that come to the public inputs also will have some sort of nuance to consider that may move this in a direction that when we get back together, we're going to say, hey, why didn't we think of this? Or some of you may have said, well, I thought about it, and maybe you said it, but it just somehow didn't resonate as we worked our way through. Okay, I'm going to do a countdown. This one, I don't even know who the number of respondents are, so there's some inconsistencies. Do a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so the next to last question. I am prepared to support and listen to the public at the public forums. You know, that's coming up November 8th, 9th, and 10th. And those that are answering B, they're maybe being honest, right? I don't want to hear what they have to say. I want to hear what they have to say.
Is there a time deadline, or could it go on for like 7 hours?
Good. I will come back to that. We were thinking, come in your pajamas. No, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. But that is a very good question. Again, our goal when we go into these meetings is I want the conversations that are emotionally based, right? You all have a vested interest in this. And what I've seen here with this committee is you guys talk about stuff and you're saying, hey, there's this and this. We can have a good dialogue. That is the goal for the public input. But we'll talk more about that here as we answer our last question. So I'll do a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so concept 1 and concept 3 should be presented at the public input sessions. So again, more conversation about what that looks like. So many people are going to come into this process and they probably didn't know anything about this. For instance, when you said, hey, there's going to be a boundary change, you might have said, well, hey, we only have 350 kids in our building. I'm fine. You probably didn't think about, hey, they're going to look at underutilization, overutilization of things. You may also come into this where you have some different ideas. You're going to be able to express that. We're setting up many different ways in which that can take place. The first is going to be in attendance to the public input. I believe one of these are going to be recorded, and so it'll be put out onto the website. When you're at the meeting, if you're not a technology person, there will be a paper copy for you to be able to give feedback, answer some questions. And if you're a tech guru, I know we've probably all gotten used to the PR codes. We'll have PR codes so that it'll take you into a link, either to the websites to view the maps, or B, into a survey where you're going to be able to provide your feedback. We also will have a tool that will be on the website where you will be able to enter your address, and you will see where you currently go to school, and then you will see see what's being proposed in concept 1 and concept 3, and again, linking you back in. The point of the public inputs is to get information in a way that's more than, I don't like the change. It's going to be trying to get back to, how does this make the system better? We're framing this. We're declining enrollments. We have islands. We have broken feeders. What is our value system for the public on how we're trying to look at solving some of these challenges? Some of these challenges, as parents, you may not see as a challenge. It may be challenges on how administration is trying to take place with the changes that occur. So again, it's very open, very much, and I'll open up to a question.
Will you take any of the feedback from tonight and adjust 1 and 3 before presenting, or will you present exactly as it is?
Yeah, good question. So what I like to do, because as a group, we may not agree with all of the changes. So what we're going to capture is the themes that you have. And when we have the page that's like benefits and drawbacks, we're going to have some common themes that we heard tonight that might be related to what you like or don't like about each of those concepts. So it will go as you saw it today, and then we'll get their feedback. When we come back on the December committee meetings, like December 7th, we'll try to integrate all of this stuff in a direction that when we meet, we'll be able to understand how does that positively or negatively impact what we have.
Just to tag on to that, will the public be able to see the current map as well?
Yeah, in fact, that's a great point. So what our timing is, because we didn't know how we would morph things this evening. This Friday, like all Fridays after these meetings, this information will be posted. We have promotional materials that will go out. When I say promotional, saying, hey, here's these public inputs on 8th, 9th, and 10th. There will be access to all of the maps. I already told you that address locator. So if you really want to get into the details of how all this stuff is impacting where you live or where your friends are or how you drive different places, you're going to have those tools. I would be disappointed if someone shows up at any of those meetings and they have not heard and can't come prepared enough to talk about some of these components and how it maybe is beneficial or how they maybe think there could be something that's changed to make it better. We all probably are understanding this. It's like a domino. As we move this piece, all of a sudden it starts to impact all of these other things. So what might be good from this particular lens, which gets into how these concepts have evolved from your comments, is if it can continue with these themes that we've outlined in concept 1 and 3, then it would be something that we could integrate in. If it was something that took it and morphed it in a different direction, then would be in support of those themes, it didn't get integrated in, as simply stated. I don't know why those percentages didn't come up, however they, but that will be in the final presentation on Friday. So I already kind of mentioned all of this. So the key thing is each of these public inputs, question?
Would it be possible to see the results of slides?
Yeah, that's what I said. I can't right now, however it was created, I don't have access to it. But yes, you will absolutely have it. I don't hide anything from you guys, you know that. I have no reason to hide it. With the public inputs, they all begin at 7 p.m. So advise that you get there early. I think my compadre, Dave, passed out like when you could attend. If it's all of them, one of them, two of them. The formats that we're going to do, and I may, want me to take it over to you? You want me to take it? I don't want to misspeak.
Thank you, Wood. So the meeting will start with, I'll start off. Ms. Donahue will speak from the board perspective, and then we will have an opportunity to talk about some questions that people have raised through the emails that we have received, through the public comments people have raised, some general theme questions. Then Rob will speak during that time. We will have time for people to go visit the maps in the auditorium, if you will, or outside of the auditoriums. And then we're going to have public comment as well, where people can come and share their comments at that time. It will not be a back and forth type of conversation, but it will be a public comment similar to how we do our board meetings. And so that's the plan for the night. But information will go out. We've created a document that will explain the evening, and that will be going out soon.
Great, thank you. Question in the back.
Will those interested to comment in the public forum have to register, and or will there be a time limit to their comments?
We'll have to have a time limit for comments, only because of the number of people who will be there. We know that if we don't have a time limit, it will create a problem. So we're looking for probably 1 to 2 minutes for people to speak per person. We would be there until probably the cows came in, if we didn't have that time.
Good questions. So again, our next time that we meet together, another question.
Can you clarify what our role is at these meetings?
Yeah,
Do
so
you
you're-
understand our point, or?
Everybody gets to be man or white. The whole point for you as a committee members with the stations that are set up, you're not trying to convince anyone that this is good or this is bad. It's to listen to what their input is. And that gives you deeper enrichment to what this may mean to certain parts of the community that you may not have familiarity. We're trying to set the expectation, and I know it's hard. People are emotional about these things, but cheering and yelling at people doesn't get us anywhere. And I would think we should all be able to agree to that, because we've been seeing this go on for long enough. But if you can come and we can have some dialogue and understand, much like I understand better the conversation on the county line versus 87th Street, when you have these conversations, you can then go, oh, hey, this is leading us in a different direction. So we're trying to set the tone that, again, we're not out here to purposely do bad things to a family or disrupt all these things. We just have been given, and you have volunteered for, this challenge of what do we do with enrollment and our capacity, and how do we get us a step farther when it gets to the Board of Education, where they can say, hey, we've vetted this through a committee, we're hearing public input, what is the direction we go? And we know we want to implement something in 22-23. That's what's been suggested. How much of it is implemented and how do you move through that process? Those are other conversations beyond what the body of work that we create. But good question. So just to listen and help them understand where they can get access to provide their comments and feedback to what they think could be beneficial to any of these changes.
Can I just add one more thing to that? I think also, as committee members, we have been engaged in very deep conversations from the very beginning. And I think it's important for people to hear just some of the thinking that went through your discussions. From the very first meeting, you dove right into it, and you determined some things and made some suggestions, which created some of the concepts along the way. I think they just need to hear, why did you get rid of the islands? Why did you decide to move this boundary from one place to another? I think that is important for people to hear that work that you put into this as well.
Other questions from committee members?
Going into the public forum, that's going to be a huge input from the community. Do you really think we're going to be able to get through everything we need to in only one meeting after that?
Well, and that's something we can discuss. If we can't get to that point, we'll talk with the district and we schedule some additional sessions. So for sure. I think we just outlined the process. We do have, at some point, something we have to give to the board for their decision. there is a timeline in which if there's going to be changes in 22, 23, administratively, we have to have a decision so that that work can begin. So there is going to be some sort of deadline. It's not, we keep doing this 1 month, 2 months, and so on. But good question. Good question. I think there's flexibility. Hey, if that's the last, you guys are free. Thank you so much. If there were notes that you wrote on any of your maps you want me to have, bring them up here. Appreciate your input. Thank you.